Hello and welcome to RacinGameShow. My name is Wojtek, and in this video we're gonna talk about force feedback settings for RaceRoom Racing Experience. At the beginning I wanted to mention that my previous video about force feedback settings in RaceRoom was done about 2 years ago. It's by far the most popular video on my channel, and it's still been visited very often, and I'm sorry to anybody who was watching this very recently, because it's totally outdated and so many things change over the years. The force feedback is completely different. The physics are maybe not completely rewritten, but they are definitely way different. Different settings applies. It's definitely improved in a big way, so I just wanted to give you updated version of the settings I'm using at the moment. I'm not playing RaceRoom Racing Experience too much recently, but I was testing the settings on several GT3 cars and Formula RaceRoom 2, I think it's called, the quickest Formula car in the open-wheeler car in the game, and that was the base for the settings I'm using at the moment. So before we go there, I just want to mention that in wheel drivers, in the settings, everything is set up to default, and off the bat in the game default settings are actually pretty good. There's not many changes to be done, so there are things you could improve or set up to your liking. All the details in a second. Before I go and show you the settings, I just want to mention I'm using a Thrustmaster TX wheel, so the settings will apply very well to Thrustmaster T300, which is pretty much identical wheel, most likely to Thrustmaster T500 as well. The information in this video will be useful for Fanatec users and Logitech users. The settings wouldn't be identical, but you still could get some useful information from the video. Okay, let's go through all the options available for the force feedback. I'm gonna get them through you one by one and see what's what. Go to the options here, and first and foremost, the first thing you want to do before going to the force feedback settings is your control settings and controller profiles. If you didn't create a new controller profile after the latest patch or after the latest major patch, it is really recommended to erase your profile and start from scratch. Otherwise it could mess up with the settings, things could be wrong, so the best way to do is just delete this profile and start from scratch. You're gonna your wheel will be detected here, so as you can tell I'm with Thrustmaster TX wheel, and once you click on it, go through the key bindings and you're gonna start from there. One of the most important stuff you're gonna bind is secondary functions and force feedback meter. This is something you wanna have handy, just to make sure you're getting the most from the force feedback when driving the cars. Okay, so let's go to the force feedback and let's go through the options one by one. Obviously it has to be turned on. It's not inverted for the Thrustmaster wheels, but it could be need for inversion if the wheel feels very wrong. That means it's probably the forces are inverted. Just try this option and it might fix your problem. Gamepad Rumble, that doesn't concern us. Force feedback intensity, we leave it at 100% as a default. And smoothing, I think 25% is the default, and I left it there because sometimes on the very rough surfaces, especially on down the straights, when some of the tracks are very rough for some reason, and your wheel, even when you go straight, your wheel is very wobbly. So smoothing these things out really helps reduce this effect. Force feedback spring and damper, we keep it at the 0%, and as you remember in our wheel settings in our drivers, we had it as a default on 100%, but once it's here at 0, this is not gonna work, and we want to have those things turned off because this is artificial effects, and if we start cranking them up, they're gonna be affecting all the feedback that goes from the car, from the tires, from the steering rack, etc. You don't want to do that. You could introduce a little bit of damping. I know some people like it, probably for more realistic feel. I personally don't use it because I find it's just simply interferes with the proper force feedback. Intensity at 70%, this is also default, and increasing this particular option makes effect on all those below, so be careful with that. If you change it here, all of those below will be affected as well. Force feedback, minimum force. Depending on your wheel, for Thrustmaster, I think it was 10% was default, and I think it's probably the best way to leave it here. If you can increase it up to 15%, but again, it might actually start introducing a lot of wobble down the straight. But if you feel that your car is very kind of like a dead center, depending on the wheel on the car, you might want to increase that. Increasing this option will definitely make a wheel a bit stronger down the middle. It's going to reduce the dead center. Understeer. Understeer is one of the less pronounced effects in the RaceRoom. I think it's not only my opinion, especially coming from other sims, other games. I always kind of struggle to feel the understeer, so I increase that option a tiny bit. Again, defaults are pretty good off the bat in this game, so slightly increasing understeer helps. I have it at 65%. And now vertical load. This is the forces that affect the car or hitting the car from the bottom of the tire. So this is forces that works up and down, let's put it that way. So whenever you go over the bumps, over the curbs, this is what gets translated to the wheel. Basically those effects are very nicely done in this game, but increasing them too hard gonna be interfering with lateral force, which is probably the most important, because lateral force, this is something you feel when the tire gets loaded in the corner. This is the forces from left to right, so the stronger you go into the corner, the more those forces gonna increase. And just be careful, increasing them way too high probably gonna introduce clipping on the wheel. So make sure you avoid that situation, and I'm gonna talk about it at the end a little bit more, so just keep that in mind. Increasing those forces might introduce a clipping as well. Steering rack. Now, I was always 100% for the feedback from the tires, and that's what I was doing recently in the past. But unfortunately in this game, this is not the way to go, which I find it quite interesting. Maybe because the tire model isn't up to par with some other games, I don't know. But definitely the steering rack is the way to go. The feeling is way more pronounced, feels way more direct, and it feels much more communicative, especially during the braking zones and into entering corner. You could reduce the 75%, but I even didn't go for that. I try to go with 0%, and it definitely loses quite a lot of detail, and it's just not the way to go. Steering rack is the way to go. There are some artificial effects as well, and one of them is the slip effect. That's the new effect, quite useful it actually makes the force feedback quite similar of what we have in Automobilista, and at default is at 50%, but what I found, if you go too high, it actually starts to interfere and overwhelms the forces from the tires or from the steering rack, and obviously this is not desired, at least not for me, because this is the most important thing you want to feel if you want to know what's happening with the car. Even reducing this to 30%, you're still gonna feel a bit of vibrations. That's gonna help to inform you that there is a slippage. At 50%, I think there's a little bit too much of the vibrations, and it's just affecting your driving. Engine vibrations, now they have it at 10% as a default, but this is totally useless option for the wheel in my opinion. Maybe it's gonna add up a little bit to the fun factor, but that's definitely not something. You don't want to introduce any noise to the wheel. You want to feel as many forces from the tires as you want. Engine vibrations probably should be used with conjunction with stuff like some transducer, like a butt kicker, that kind of stuff. Not necessary for the wheel. Curb vibrations, this is for 2D curbs that are not fully recreated in the tracks. I don't know, to be honest, where those curbs are on which tracks, if there's many of them. I leave this option as a default, and as far as I know, most of the curbs, like probably 90% of the curbs in the game, are reproduced in 3D, so you get that curb feeling anyway from the vertical forces. And the shift effect, that's actually quite nice effect, especially very well felt in the front wheel drive cars, and definitely increases fun factor. Doesn't really affect you that much unless you're shifting the front wheel drive car in the corners, then it might actually throw you a little bit off the line. It's realistic, but if you turn it off, it's probably gonna be a little bit of a cheat mode from the front wheel drive cars. Okay, I think that's it. When it comes to the options in here, there's one more thing I wanted to show you in the actual garage menu. So we're gonna go and load the truck, and during driving you want to control your force feedback meter. As I showed you at the beginning, you need to bind this key to whatever you want, and it's showing up here in the top left hand corner, and any forces recreated or showed up below the yellow line are translated into the force above those yellow line. That's our minimum force, and the red line is the clipping. If you're clipping in the corners, this is bad, because clipping means that your wheel is not able to reproduce the forces that sim is trying to output, and I like to hold all the forces below the red line. As you've seen, it was going a tiny bit over the red line, so I probably would be trying to reduce the forces a tiny bit, and I'm gonna show you in which menu you're gonna do that. Now every car is a little bit different, so Sector 3 Studios introduced a very nice feature. In the car setup menu, you go here to steering settings, and you can adjust force feedback multiplier. Probably gonna reduce it by 2 clicks, but what's nice about this thing, you can save it here in the car setup separately for every single car, because every single car will be a little bit different, or even every car will be a bit different on every other track. So this is very useful option that's gonna allow you to avoid clipping, or increase the force feedback if it's too weak in some of the other cars. So you're gonna go back here. And one more thing, wheel range. This is something that's automatically adjusted in the game. So another very cool feature that was introduced in one of the later patches. So if you leave it at the default in the steering wheel drivers outside the game will adjust this for every single car in a realistic way. So I always leave it as it is. Okay, I think that covers everything. I really hope it covers everything. If you have any questions, any comments, please don't hesitate, leave me a comment. I try to answer all of them. If I did something wrong, something very wrong in your opinion, yeah, I really like to hear from you. If you like the settings, give me positive feedback as well. I'm looking forward. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys around again. Take care.